أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي Amma ba'd. Sister Fizza, I know we read Fatiha for their family in general, but Sister Fizza asked me to remember in particular her mother, Shifa Auntie, who passed away recently and was here during Ramadan last year. So let's recite one more Fatiha for her soul, preceded by Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اللهم ابعث ثوابها إلى روح المرحوم. We are speaking during these nights about this topic of nifaq. I introduced the topic yesterday and I wanted to impress upon you the importance of understanding this concept that's so prevalent in the Quran. And we talked about the meaning of nifaq, this two-facedness that anyone can have, and that's really the danger of it and the relevance for us as believers. Part of it is recognizing our enemies, but part of it is also recognizing the weaknesses within ourselves. And both aspects of this are important. If you look at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, you get a good indication of how significant nifaq is with respect to iman and kufr. Right? So in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah is introducing the Quran as guidance. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So it's guidance, and we as recipients of that guidance can have one of three responses to it. And he spends the first 5 verses of the surah outlining the kind of person who avails himself of that guidance. And the muttaqi is somebody who may not even be Muslim yet, but has humility, is a truth seeker, is looking and asking the questions and willing to accept everything that's true. That's the person for whom this Quran is guidance. He already has fear of God before he even finds Allah, before he even finds Islam. Well, that's the muttaqi. Now he can avail himself of the guidance and make use of the guidance, and Allah increases the guidance. وَيَزِيدُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا هُدًى. If you take steps towards accepting His guidance, then He increases the guidance. He gives you special tawfiqat, puts the right resources in your path, so that you encounter those ideas and it becomes a whole school of life for you as you progress towards Allah. So the first 5 verses of Baqarah are dealing with the mu'min and the person who is muttaqi and avails himself of guidance. Then the next 2 verses are about kuffar. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. The 2 verses only are devoted to the kuffar. And when the Quran talks about kuffar, there are two categories of kafir. So kafir simply means non-Muslim. However, when the Quran is talking about kuffar in this way, the description is very clear. Not every kafir is like this. I just mentioned you can have that muttaqi kafir. Muttaqi in the sense that they're truth seekers. They've submitted to truth. Whatever they know of truth, they accept. Whatever doesn't make sense, they question it, they reject it. But they haven't yet found the path. Right? That is, it could be a kafir even, who is looking for the truth but hasn't encountered it. But the kafir that he's describing in these next 2 verses, he says it's the same to them whether you warn them or don't warn them, they're never going to believe. That's not the run-of-the-mill kafir. This is somebody who is hard-hearted. This is someone who is stubborn and arrogant, who couldn't care less whether what you say makes sense or not. It doesn't jive with what he wants to believe, what he is used to, what his culture says, what his background is. Because it's something that he doesn't want to accept, he's not going to accept it no matter how logical it is, no matter how much it kind of strikes a chord with him, he'll turn his back on it. Why? Because Allah has sealed his senses. خَتَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ وَعَلَى سَمْعِهِمْ. He's put a seal on their heart, their mind, their ability to perceive truth. He's put a seal on their ears. There's a veil over their eyes. Now this is not the cause of his misguidance. This is actually the first punishment of his own choice of misguidance. So of course Allah is just. He wouldn't put blindfolds on us and say, why are you blind? I'm going to punish you because you're blind. Well, if you put the blindfold on me, if you've knocked my eyes out, then it's not my fault, it's your fault. Allah, when He's sealing the person's eyes and ears and heart, it's not that Allah has initiated this veil on the person, but within the person himself there's that arrogance. He doesn't care about the truth, he doesn't care about what makes sense, he just wants to do whatever he wants to do. When that's there, then the first punishment that Allah gives that person is He makes it so that the person can't perceive truth anymore. He can't use his eyes to see good and true things. He can't use his ears to listen to good and true things. Right? But just 2 verses are devoted to the kuffar, but then the next page, more than a page, from verses 8 to verses 20 of Surah Al-Baqarah are dealing with munafiqeen. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَقُولُ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And then he says, فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٍ. Right, so there are some people, this third category of people, who when they're faced with that guidance of Quran, this hudan lil muttaqeen, their response is to say we believe when they don't really believe. That's that two-facedness that we've been talking about with nifaq. The munafiq is, he has this problem where in his heart he doesn't believe, but he puts on a show for various reasons. He might see that it's in his interest. His family they're all believers, so he has to kind of conform to that, but he doesn't have anything to do with religion inside. He sees that there's some benefit to being with the Muslims, but he'll take advantage of the benefit, but he doesn't have any belief within his heart. They think, the worst of them, they think they're tricking others. They're trying to trick God, pretending that they believe, thinking they can pull one over on God. They think they can trick the believers, when really they're only hurting themselves. The only one they're actually fooling is themselves. And they have this disease in their heart. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٍ. That marad, that disease, is again not something that God has planted in their heart. That doubt, that resistance to truth, that arrogance, those qualities that they have within them, that sickness that's growing inside of them, it's something they themselves have adopted. They've chosen that path. But once they've chosen that path and they're now acting on it, instead of trying to resolve doubt, if I don't understand something, instead of asking questions to learn, if I just accumulate the doubt, sit on it, let it fester, I'm so lackadaisical that I don't have to address it and just keep it accumulating, that doubt eventually blossoms into this festering kufr. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. That initial kernel of disease that's in their heart, Allah increases it. It begins to grow, it begins to overtake their heart, so now they can't see the truth even if they wanted to, because they're so far down this rabbit hole that they can't get out. So this is the way Allah deals with the munafiqeen. He puts a lot of emphasis on describing them to us, giving us their attributes, giving us all sorts of different ways to describe them metaphorically, to help us to understand. What I'd like to do starting today, maybe for a couple of days, is to go through the surah we have in Quran which is dedicated to the munafiqeen, Suratul Munafiqun. This is a surah that we recite on Jumu'ah. It's recommended as one of the surahs to recite in the Jumu'ah prayer. And there's some significance to it. Both Suratul Munafiqun and even Suratul Jumu'ah has the same element. The end of Suratul Jumu'ah also describes these people who they're willing to run after worldly pursuits and leave the Prophet standing on the minbar. Right? Their priorities are such that he's here giving a khutbah, he's here speaking to them, and a caravan comes by, or some people come by selling some wares, and the entire masjid is emptied because they're all excited about the wares, and it describes that Rasulullah is left standing with no audience. That's the quality of a munafiq. That's a kind of a nifaq that you have Rasulullah in front of you trying to talk to you and you're after the dunya. These are attributes of munafiqeen in this Jumu'ah khutbah, which in its best form is a kind of political speech, a kind of rallying of the community on a weekly basis, a way of disseminating knowledge and policy and analyzing affairs and these kinds of things in its best form. So that Jumu'ah khutbah is also filled with these two surahs that are about munafiqeen. Surah Al-Munafiqun starts, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, إِذَا جَاءَكَ الْمُنَافِقُونَ قَالُوا نَشْهَدُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُهُ وَاللَّهُ يَشْهَدُ إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَكَاذِبُونَ. When these hypocrites come to you, their declaration is that we attest that you are the messenger of God. Allah, of course, knows that you're the messenger of God, but God also attests that the munafiqeen are liars. There's this back and forth between these three sentences. The interesting thing is that the thing that the munafiqeen are saying is absolutely true. Yet Allah calls them liars. إِذَا جَاءَكَ الْمُنَافِقُونَ قَالُوا نَشْهَدُ إِنَّكَ لَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ. That's the half of the shahada. We testify, we attest to the fact that you are the messenger of God. Is that true or false? That's a true statement. What does Allah say about them? وَاللَّهُ يَشْهَدُ إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ لَكَاذِبُونَ. Allah testifies against them that they're all liars. The interesting thing is that how can you be telling a lie if what you're saying is true? Right? This kind of builds the complexity of that munafiq. He can say something that's true, but it's actually at its heart a lie. So if you think about what they're saying, we testify that you are the messenger of God. Right? Factually, the information in it is true. He is indeed the messenger of God. But by testifying, what are they actually saying? What's the implied message of Ashhadu annaka Rasulullah? The implied message is, I believe this. I'm giving a shahada. I'm attesting to this fact. I'm declaring that it's true. So regardless of the truth or falsehood of the statement itself, what Allah is calling them out for is the fact that they're claiming that this is their belief. I believe that you are the messenger of God. So being the messenger of God is true, but the fact that you're claiming you believe it, that's a lie. The faith is not in your heart. Right? So in technical terms, they say it's a kidh mukhbiri, not a kidh khabari. The information of your sentence is true, but the attribution of that sentence to you, that's where the falsehood is. So it's quite complex, and that should give us a taste of how hard it is to parse apart nifaq. Yesterday we talked about this idea that if truth and falsehood are clear, then it's clear. It's very easy to tell the difference. The problem is when things get mixed up, and you have elements of falsehood mixed in with truth, then it's really challenging. You have to be very nuanced. You have to be able to parse apart those details and say, this part of what they're saying is true, but this part is false, and it becomes a very, very delicate matter to try to separate all of that. And the munafiq is expert at selling his falsehood in the disguise of the truth. And that makes it even harder because you don't even realize that there's falsehood embedded in all of this thing that looks like truth, and the beginning looks good and the end looks good, and so you take the whole thing and you don't realize that there are all these kind of bombs that are placed within it of falsehood, and when you take the whole thing, then you end up with so much of a disease and so much falsehood there with you. So when we say things, there are different levels of the communication that's happening. A simple sentence. If I say, I'm so glad you're here. All right. If I say, I'm so glad you're here, so what I'm saying is expressing some emotion, some pleasure at the fact that you are present. But I can say that same sentence with sarcasm. I'm so glad you're here, but I don't really mean it. I really wish you weren't here. But I'm so glad, I say the words are still the same, but now the expression, the tone, the interaction between us, the baggage that's there, the bad blood that's there, communicates something very different. The sarcasm can be there, and there's an implied message that I really wish you were not here, and I'm angry that you're here, but I'm saying these words that express that I wish you were here, or I'm glad you are here. Or if I change the emphasis, if I say, I'm so glad you're here. Now the implied message is I'm saying something bad about someone else. I'm glad that person's not here. I'm so glad you're here instead of that guy. And so the same words, depending on how they're delivered, depending on all these factors, they can communicate very different things, and that's where things get complicated. Advertisers use this. This is the bread and butter of the industry. If you want me to buy something, then package it in such a way that you communicate these implicit messages. Show me someone who's happy and successful. It's a sunny day and they're walking through a beautiful environment, and then show me them using your product, and implicitly my mind starts to make connections that somehow that product has led to your happiness. So that if I use that product, then I should also expect to have that kind of happiness. And so connections start firing in our mind that build those associations, and then I go out and I buy that thing. It's all a lie. There's no connection between all those things that they're showing of this person, how well he's dressed, how good he looks, how healthy he is, how good the weather is. What does that have to do with this candy bar or this medicine or this whatever product it is that they're selling to me? But that's the way they're communicating the whole idea to me, to sell me on the product by showing me that all these associations will also come with the product, as though they're selling the whole package. But of course that's not the case. In political speak, the same thing happens all the time. How much do governments, especially our government, will talk about liberty and freeing people, how important freedom is. And the lengths that they'll go to sell that are incredible, but then the actions that go with those slogans are destruction and warfare, deprivation of people, looting countries, so that yes, Americans can live at a standard, the ones who are kind of buying the propaganda, feel like they're living well and their lifestyle is supported. And at least what our government is saying it's doing to these other places is it's bringing freedom to them. They were being oppressed by a government that they had the misfortune of electing themselves, that was wrongly acting in its own people's interest, when really it should have been acting in American interest. And so we need to teach them about freedom. And so we'll destroy that society, we'll topple the government, put someone in power who's not democratically elected, but who serves our interest, and convince our people that we're doing all this in the name of freedom, liberty, democracy. And we'll use words that are very powerful, very evocative. It's very hard to say, I'm not for freedom. I don't like people to have the choice of democracy. If you say you don't like those ideas, then it feels very uncomfortable. You're so trained to think that those ideas they're good. When they're complex ideas, that freedom of what? Freedom from what? At what cost? What are the consequences of that freedom? You give me ultimate freedom, and all of us ultimate freedom, we can do whatever we want. That means you're going to expose me to things that I don't want to be exposed to. I should be free from being exposed to those corrupting elements. But that's considered restriction. That's considered, being morally too kind of preaching to people, right? So these words are convoluted. Good words are twisted, diluted, co-opted for evil purposes. All of this is the result of this kind of nifaq. Even a question which we say there's no wrong question, there's no dumb question, but even questions which shouldn't be true or false. A question can have implications that are wrong. Imam Ali Islam in one place says, Sal tafaqquhan, wa la tasal ta'annutan. If you ask a question, ask for the purpose of tafaqquh, to reach fiqh, to reach understanding. So if I have a question, I should ask it, and it should be a sincere question that's well formulated. And my goal is that you have some information that I don't have. I need that information from you. I need some guidance from you. And so I ask the question, and now I'm open to the answer. That's a good dynamic. That shows humility on my part, and now your answer will have some benefit for me because I'm prepared for receiving that benefit. That's tafaqquh in your su'al, in your question. He says, don't ask, la tasal ta'annutan. Don't ask for evil purposes, to bother the person. Just think there are different reasons why sometimes people ask questions. There's one time when I want to show you how smart I am, and so I ask a very complicated question. Not because I want an answer. I already have the answer. I already know much more than the answer, but I ask the question because the question will impress all of you. Because I think that maybe you can't come up with this kind of intelligent question. So still a question. You might say, well, there's no wrong question. This question is wrong. Why? Because the intention behind the question is wrong. Or I ask to make a fool of you. I ask you a question when you're in a question I know you can't answer, just to stump you. And then when you stumble and you can't come up with the answer, then I show everyone, look, he doesn't even know the answer to this question. I know the answer. That's a wrong question. I was asking for the purpose. I might as well be telling you that you're a fool. But instead of just telling it to you straight, that would at least be, there would be some decency that you're straightforward with that. But I'm asking you, and by asking, I'm trying to make a fool of you in front of people. One of my teachers in Qom, he said that the first year he went out for tabligh into the villages of Iran, the leader of that community invited him to dinner, and as they're eating, the elderly person, he asks, very thoughtfully, in this verse of Surah Al-Nazi'at, is it وَالنَّازِعَاتِ نَزْعَ or وَالنَّازِعَاتِ نِزْعَ? What's the right pronunciation for this? And my teacher didn't know the surah, he didn't know anything. He said, Naz'a sounds right, so he answered Naz'a. And the person said, it's neither, it's وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقَ. Right? He knew the answer to begin with, but he wanted to make a fool of this young scholar just coming out of Qom to say, he doesn't know anything, I know more than him. So he asked the question with that kind of intent. It's a wrong question, it's a bad question, an evil intent in trying to make a fool of somebody. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this nifaq, if you think of what the opposite is, yesterday we were trying to think of the relationships between these words, iman and kufr and nifaq. So sometimes we think when the opposite of iman, believing and having conviction in truth, is to reject all of those things. So kufr would be the opposite of that. And nifaq is a subset of, it overlaps with both of these. Because the munafiq is also Muslim in the sense that he says the shahadatain. But in his heart, he's kafir, completely or at least partially. It's a range. You could have very deep-seated nifaq that's all-encompassing. You don't accept a single word of anything that's true. Or more likely, you pick and choose and you believe some things, but you reject other things. But it's all covered up with this facade of Islam. The opposite of this munafiq, who's two-faced, the opposite of nifaq would be sadaqa, khulus. Being straightforward, being truthful, being honest. What I believe, I express. And I live by that. Whatever is on the inside is also what's on the outside. I don't try to hide things from you. I don't try to play games. I don't try to camouflage things. I'm not always looking for an angle. That doesn't mean I necessarily have to say everything. لا تقل ما لا تعلم بل لا تقل كل ما تعلم. You don't have to necessarily say everything you know. Definitely don't say things you don't know. But sometimes you know something, you don't want to say it for a good reason. So you can think of reasons why it's a good purpose, not selfish, not trying to dupe the person and undermine the person, but there might be some wisdom in not expressing something of truth to somebody. So the opposite of a munafiq is someone who's sadiq, who's truthful, who's clear, crystal clear. And whatever you get on the outside is what you also have on the inside of that person. I'll share one hadith that we have. This is a hadith that's quoted in Al-Ihtijaj of At-Tabarsi. And it goes back to Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. In this interaction, Kitab al-Ihtijaj is a very interesting and beautiful book. Ihtijaj means argumentation. Like when you say hujjah is a proof that I bring to the argument to say, I believe such and such, and here's my hujjah to support my claim. Here's my evidence. So in ihtijaj, you're presenting evidence, the other person is presenting evidence, and there's a debate of some sort. This individual known as Tawus al-Yamani is a Sunni, you can say mukhalif of that time, a scholar. He's a tabi'i, and he's well known in Sunni circles for having been in the company of many companions of the Prophet, and he's seen as a person of high caliber. This Tawus al-Yamani, literally the peacock of Yemen, he comes في جماعة من أصحابه ثم قال لأبي جعفر عليه السلام إذن لي بالسؤال. He comes into the presence of the fifth Imam and he asks him, please give me permission to ask a few questions of you. The Imam says, I give you permission, fasal. So he goes through and asks all these questions, and again he's asking, you can see from the questions themselves, it's all ta'annut. The wrong intention of asking questions, they're riddles. He thinks he's going to pull one over on the Imam, so he asks these questions thinking that he's going to trick the Imam and make a fool of him in front of his companions and maybe his own companions as well. So a couple of the questions, just to give you a taste, and then we'll get into the idea of nifaq as well in the Surah Al-Munafiqun. He says, مَتَى هَلَكَ ثُلُثُ النَّاسِ. When in history have a third of all humans died? So you're probably scratching your head, or you know the answer from before. So the Imam's response is, you're wrong. Right, it's a question again, but the Imam's question is wahimt. Right, this is you made a mistake. You're trying to stump me, but actually you stumped yourself. You asked the wrong question. He says, Ya Shayk aradta an taqul mata halaka rub'un nas. It wasn't the case that a third of people were ever killed or died. It was that a fourth of people were killed or died. When was that? He says, ذَلِكَ يَوْمَ قَتَلَ قَابِيلُ هَابِيلُ. When Qabil killed his brother Habil, how many people were there? Only 4. Adam, Eve, Qabil, Habil. One of them kills one. That's 1 out of 4 is killed. So it's a riddle, but the purpose, the idea behind me sharing this is the intention that the person has in asking it, trying to stump the Imam. That's a wrong purpose for asking questions. Then he says, فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنْ أَوَّلِ كَذِبَةٍ كُذِبَتْ وَمَنْ صَاحِبُهَا. What's the first lie ever told and who told it? The Imam's response is Iblis. حين قال أنا خير من خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. When he made the claim that I'm better than Adam because you've made me out of fire and you made him out of lowly clay. That's the first false statement ever said by any creature. Then he says فأخبرني عن قوم شهدوا شهادة الحق وكانوا كاذبين. Tell me about a people who gave true testimony to something while they were liars. They said something, the shahada was a true shahada, a true testimony to something, but they were liars in saying it. So it's Surah Al-Munafiqun. The Imam says, Al-Munafiqun حين قالوا لرسول الله نشهد إنك لرسول الله. And he quotes the verse from Surah Al-Munafiqun, where Allah is calling out the Munafiqun as liars for having said what is at its face value true, but they're liars in attributing that true thing to themselves. You can't claim to testify to something if you don't believe it yourself, even if what you're testifying to is true. All right. The next verse says, اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة فصدوا عن سبيل الله إنهم ساء ما كانوا يعملون. Allah is talking about these munafiqeen, and one of the attributes He calls them out for is that they take refuge behind their false oaths. They swear, I swear I'm telling the truth. By this and by that, I am telling the truth. Wallah, I'm telling the truth. They're making all these oaths to testify or to emphasize the fact that what they're saying is true. And they're making this array of oaths like a shield, a junnah behind which they're hiding to protect themselves. But as the result of these oaths, because they're false oaths, they don't end up protecting them at all. And either they themselves are misguided or they misguide others. فَصَدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ إِنَّهُمْ سَاءَ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. I'll give you one example of this because it's a little bit of a riddle. Sometimes the Quran speaks in a way and at first it doesn't seem like, what is the example of this? How does this play out? So we have an example not from the time of Rasulullah, but some of his companions in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, where they make this kind of a false yameen, a false oath, and Amir al-Mu'mineen calls them out on it. So this happens in the time of the lead up to the Battle of Jamal. So the Battle of Jamal is the first engagement that Amir al-Mu'mineen has to go get into, because some of his close companions, the first two people who gave their pledge of allegiance to him, Talha and Zubayr, they realize that what they think are their best interests are not going to be served by continuing to support Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now these two individuals, they were outstanding during the Prophet's time. They were some of the few individuals who stuck by Amir al-Mu'mineen when everyone else was giving their bay'ah to Abu Bakr. They're the ones who came into his house with their swords drawn and said, give us the word and we'll go out fighting. Along with Salman and Abu Dhar and all these individuals, Talha and Zubayr were there. And now 25 years of usurped khilafah, they've been by his side. And now when he finally becomes khalifa by popular demand of the people, again they're the first to come and say, we give our allegiance to you as Amir al-Mu'mineen, as Khalifa. And then as soon as they realize that he's not going to give them what they expected, they thought that now their payday has arrived. They've been loyal, and now their loyalty should be repaid. Right, this is actually a really good dynamic to understand the munafiqeen as well. That'll help us when we're understanding the other companions of the Prophet as well, because there's this false notion, I think I alluded to it yesterday, that munafiqeen only arose in Medina. And in Mecca, why would there be any munafiq? There's no interest in a person being a munafiq in Mecca. Why? Because it's all torture and boycott and deprivation in Mecca. What does the person gain who is kafir at heart? What does he gain by saying, I'm Muslim? He'll just get ousted by his family, put under house arrest, tortured by his elders. Why would someone face that if they didn't believe in the message of the Prophet? So the idea is that all the muhajirun who were in Mecca in the early part of Islam, they must all be sincere Muslims, because why would anyone do that to themselves? Sometimes it's not immediate payday that you expect. You see what's being promised, you see what's coming, and for later benefit, you might endure the hardship now. Especially if you're from a lowly tribe who's already disrespected, then you have nothing to lose by taking a few more beatings from your family, aligning yourself from this person who's claiming that we're going to rule over the Persians and the Romans eventually. So that sounds like a very good deal. If you can just suck it up for a bit, then eventually that payday will come. So this Talha and Zubair, they are in the same camp. They endured all these tribulations with the Prophet, with Amir al-Mu'mineen for so many years now. This is 25 years after Rasulullah, plus all the time with Rasulullah. Zubair is a family member of Rasulullah, right? His aunt's son. So a first cousin of Rasulullah. His mother is Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. So when they realize that he's not going to give them appointments to governorships, he's taking away their extra stipend that Umar had designated for them because they were early companions, they were muhajireen, because Umar had started to differentiate. Rasulullah would give everyone the same stipend. Now Umar said that no, not everyone should get the same stipend. If you converted earlier, you get more. If you converted later, you get less. If you're Arab, you get more. If you're non-Arab, you get less. If you're Quraysh, you get more. If you're non-Quraysh, you get less. And he made all these divisions between people, and so Talha and Zubair, these kinds of people who had been there from not day one exactly, but early days, they were living high on the hog, on the halal hog. And now all of a sudden, Amir al-Mu'mineen, after 25 years of this kind of skimming off the top, he's not willing to do that anymore. He says, no, everyone gets the same. And so they realize that they've backed the wrong horse. So they make up a false claim that they were forced into giving bay'ah. When they're the first ones to give bay'ah, willingly, they say, no, Malik was there and we were afraid he was going to hurt us if we didn't give bay'ah, so we gave it under duress. So our bay'ah doesn't count. And Ali he's not responsible for Uthman's death, but he knows who killed him. And until Uthman's blood is not avenged, then Amir al-Mu'mineen is responsible for that. When it's the same Talha and Zubair who actually had more role to play. Marwan, the cousin of Uthman, he kills Talha, stabs in the back on the battlefield. They're on the same side. He kills him on the battlefield because he thinks Talha is actually responsible for his cousin Uthman's death. But Talha has the gall to say, no, Amir al-Mu'mineen is responsible, and until he calls the perpetrators to justice, then his position as caliphate is not valid. So these individuals, they realize that they're not going to be served by Imam Ali alayhi salam, and they leave. I'll share a little bit. This is actually a really good book for you all to have access to. Shayk al-Mufid, his Kitab al-Irshad, which is a biography of all the Imams. He also wrote a book called Al-Jamal, which is on the Battle of Jamal, and it's been translated by the same author, same translator of Kitab al-Irshad, I.K.A. Howard. I think it wasn't completed by him and he died, so others completed it for him, but it's been published recently. So I'll share a couple of lines from this. Talha and Zubair went to the commander of the faithful. They had deliberately gone at a time when he would be alone. They went to him and said, Commander of the faithful, we have come to ask your permission to go to Umrah. He did not allow them. So they're in Medina, and they make this false claim that they want to go for Umrah, which is in Mecca, and that's where all the people who were serving Uthman, all his cousins and all of his governors have fled to Mecca to rally there and then figure out what to do. And so when they say they want to go to Umrah, Imam Ali knows what they want to do. They're not happy with him, and so they want to go and join forces with the Uthmanis and cause some trouble there. He did not allow them. Then they said, we have not performed it for a long time, so permit us to go. By God, Ali replied, you are not intending to make the Umrah, but you are intending treachery. You only mean to go to Basra. Oh God, forgive you, they exclaimed, we only intended to make Umrah. They're making these pledges, these ayman. Then Imam Ali says, swear to me before Almighty God that you will not corrupt the affairs of the Muslims at my expense, and that you will not renounce your pledge of allegiance to me, and that you will not help to spread civil discord. They uttered oaths about the things which he had asked them to swear. When they left him, Ibn Abbas met them. So they make the oaths, these ayman, the different kinds of, they swear that they're telling the truth. They're swearing that they won't do all these different things that he tells them not to do. Now they're leaving and they meet Abdullah ibn Abbas. He asks them, did the commander of the faithful permit you to go for Umrah? They say yes. So then Ibn Abbas is confused. He goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen and asks him. He says, I have seen Talha and Zubair, And then Imam Ali says, they have just asked my permission to make the Umrah. I gave it to them after I had bound them by oaths not to commit treachery, nor renounce their pledges, nor create civil discord. Yet by God, Ibn Abbas, I know that they only intend civil discord. It is as if I am with them and they have arrived at Mecca in order to strive for war against me. Then Ibn Abbas says, since that is known to you, O Commander of the Faithful, then why did you give them permission to go? Why didn't you imprison them, put them in iron chains, and protect the Muslims from their evil? Imam Ali says, Ibn Abbas, do you tell me to start with injustice and to do evil before good? Shall I give punishment on suspicion and accusation, or shall I act against that which has not yet occurred? No, by God, I will not turn aside from the law and justice which God has imposed upon me. Ibn Abbas, I will not begin with such a decision. I have given permission to them to go, even though I know what will come from them. However, I have sought the help of God against them. By God, I will indeed fight them and frustrate their intention. They will not obtain what they wish for what they wish for in this matter. God will seize them for their wrongdoing and their renunciation of the pledge of allegiance made to me and their aggression against me. And that is exactly what happens. They launch a rebellion in Basra. Talha, Zubayr, they convince Aisha to join forces with them. Marwan and all these people also join forces with them. They go to Basra, get the people excited, and they launch a rebellion. Imam Ali has to go and pull people from Kufa, from Medina, and put the rebellion down. All of the instigators are killed, except for Aisha, whom Amir al-Mu'mineen puts in the trust of her brother, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, and says, take her home and make sure she stays there, and follows the commandment of Allah, وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ وَلَا تَبَرَّجْنَ تَبَرُّجَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ الْأُولَى. Stay in your homes, O wives of the Prophet, and don't display yourselves like you used to back in the Jahiliyyah. So this is a very good example, actually, of someone who اتَّخَذُوا أَيْمَانَهُمْ جُنَّةً فَصَدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. These false pledges, they thought this would protect them, that this would be a good deception to fool Amir al-Mu'mineen, but actually they themselves misguided themselves, and they met their fate. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to understand these difficult concepts of the Quran, especially its nifaq, not only as a theory, but then to understand in the world how to differentiate between truth and falsehood when it's all mixed. Guide us during this month of Ramadan to worship you in ways that you deserve, and make up for all of our shortcomings in our worship. Accept all of our good deeds, cure those who are sick, help those who are single to get married, help those who are married to have happy marriages, and help all of our kids to be successful in this world and the hereafter. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Let's stand for the ziyarah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين. السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم جميعا أهل بيت النبوة ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على